The Rise of Victimhood Culture by Campbell and Manning provides a sociological framework for understanding a profound shift in moral conflict, arguing that modern society, especially on campuses and online, is moving from a dignity culture, where self-worth is internal and slights are ignored, to a victimhood culture, where moral status is derived from public recognition of one's victimization. This culture incentivizes hypersensitivity, the publicizing of microaggressions, and appeals to authority for moral validation, replacing resilience with competitive victimhood. In parallel, Christopher Caldwell's The Age of Entitlement offers a sweeping political history contending that America, since the 1960s, has built a second constitution atop its first, a system of group-based entitlements rooted in civil rights law that fundamentally redefined citizenship. Caldwell argues this system replaced individual rights and democratic process with state-managed social engineering, fostering a national mindset of grievance and entitlement that pits groups against each other and corrodes civic unity. Together, these works present a powerful, unsettling thesis. The political structure Caldwell describes has created the perfect conditions for the social behavior Campbell and Manning analyze, charting America's shift from a society of self-reliant individuals to one of state-sanctioned claimants defined by victimhood. They identify three primary types. Honor culture is the oldest. Think of medieval knights, pastoral herders, or the antebellum American South. In honor cultures, a person's worth is extrinsic. It resides in their reputation among others. This reputation must be actively defended. An insult is not a mere slight, it is a direct attack on the self. Consequently, the response is personal and often violent. Dueling, feuding, and vigilantism are the mechanisms of justice. The individual, or their immediate kin, is the enforcer. The key virtue here is courage, the willingness to fight for your standing. Dignity culture emerges with the Enlightenment, the rise of the modern state and liberal democracy. Here, a person's worth is intrinsic, it is inherent and inalienable. All men are created equal. In a dignity culture, you are taught to have a thick skin. Insults are to be ignored or handled with stoicism. The mantra is, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Conflict resolution is outsourced from the individual to neutral third-party institutions, courts, HR departments, administrative boards. The goal is not to win glory, but to achieve a just, dispassionate outcome. The key virtues are tolerance, self-restraint, and reason. Now, Campbell and Manning argue that in the early 21st century, particularly on university campuses and in online activist communities, we are witnessing the rise of a third model, victimhood culture. In victimhood culture, moral status is not based on a reputation for toughness, honor, nor on an internal, unassailable worth, dignity. Instead, moral status is derived from perceived victimization. To have high standing, one must be or be seen as a victim of oppression, particularly oppression from a dominant social group. This creates a unique social logic. Sensitivity is no longer a weakness, it is a virtue. It proves you are attuned to the microaggressions and structural harms that others might miss. When a slight occurs, the response is not a duel, honor, nor is it to brush it off, dignity. The response is to publicize the offense, to mobilize third parties, not neutral institutions, but morally aligned authorities or the court of public opinion to condemn the offender and validate the victim. This is where concepts like microaggressions become central. A microaggression is the perfect offense for a victimhood culture. It is often ambiguous, often unintentional. Its power lies not in its individual impact, but in its symbolism. It is seen as a manifestation of a larger systemic oppression. Documenting and calling out microaggressions serves a dual purpose. It proves the victim's moral sensitivity, their status, and it publicly maps the landscape of oppressive behavior, training others in the new moral code. Safe spaces are the logical environments for this culture.
They are not merely physical locations free from overt harassment. They are social and intellectual spaces where the norms of dignity culture, just debate the idea, not the person, develop resilience, are suspended. They are zones where the victimhood culture's code is the dominant and protected one, shielding participants from the psychological demand to tolerate what they perceive as intolerable expressions of oppression. Campbell and Manning are explicit. They are not judging the truth or falsity of any particular claim of victimization. Their subject is the social style of conflict. In victimhood culture, the currency is moral prestige, acquired through recognized oppression. This leads to a competition for the purest victim status, an intense scrutiny of language and behavior for potential offense, and a social dynamic where forgiveness is seen as weakness and public shaming is the primary tool for enforcement. The call for accountability in this frame is almost always a call for the offender's punishment and degradation, not for a process of reconciliation or proportional justice. Now we shift from the sociology of daily interaction to the grand stage of political history with Christopher Caldwell. His argument is more sweeping and in many ways more radical. He contends that America experienced a nonviolent but profound constitutional revolution beginning in the 1960s. The first American Constitution, ratified in 1789, is a framework of process, individual rights, and limited government. It is, in his view, a dignity culture document par excellence. It assumes citizens with intrinsic rights who use democratic processes to govern themselves. The revolution came with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Caldwell argues this act and the ideological regime built upon it effectively created a second constitution. This new constitution was not about process, but about outcomes. Its central principle was that the federal government had a moral and legal duty not merely to ensure equal treatment under the law, but to actively dismantle social and economic inequality for historically victimized groups. This created a new category of rights. The old Constitution gave you rights against the state, free speech, bearing arms. The new Constitution gave you rights from the state, entitlements to certain outcomes like access to jobs via affirmative action, freedom from a hostile work environment, or later recognition of same-sex marriage. These rights were different. They were not universal, they were group-based, tied to historical victimization, and they required for their enforcement a vast, unelected, and permanently growing bureaucracy, the EEOC, HUD, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Caldwell's central provocative claim is that this second constitution was incompatible with the first. The first prized colorblindness, the second required racial categorization. The first relied on democratic majorities, the second was often enforced by judges and bureaucrats against majority will. The first assumed a citizenry bound by a common civic identity. The second incentivized seeing oneself primarily as a member of a grieved group entitled to reparation. This is what he calls the Age of Entitlement. It created a nation of claimants. For the protected groups, the logic was clear. Your claim on the state and on society is based on your group's historical victimization. For the white middle class, a parallel system of entitlements emerged. Student loans, mortgage interest deductions, Medicare, which were politically sold as earned benefits, which were in reality just as much state-bestowed privileges. The result, Caldwell argues, was a corrosion of the older civic virtues of self-reliance, sacrifice, and national unity. It fostered a culture of grievance, a zero-sum competition between groups for victim-based spoils, and a language in which every political demand is framed as a right owed to rectify historical wrongs. He meticulously traces this logic from civil rights through feminism to the gay rights movement, showing how each expansion used the same legal and bureaucratic machinery, deepening the state's role as the arbiter of social justice and validator of victim status. The system, he concludes, is financially unsustainable, a vortex of spending, and socially unsustainable. It breeds division and resentment. It has, in his view, transformed the country's governing philosophy without its conscious consent. Now we bring these two powerful analyses together. They're not saying the same thing, but they are describing different levels of the same profound shift. Campbell and Manning give us the micro-sociological reality on the ground. They show us how people behave in a world shaped by the logic Caldwell describes. When the highest political and legal authorities, the state, the courts, university administrations, validate claims based on group victimization and agree to police social life to correct perceived inequities, it is not surprising that a victimhood culture flourishes. The social incentives align perfectly with the political structure. The call-out culture, the sensitivity training, the demand for safe spaces are not random aberrations. They are the behavioral manifestations of a society that has adopted, both legally and morally, the principle that victim status grants moral authority and a claim to institutional protection and resources.
The Critique of Liberalism. Both books are, at their core, critiques of a certain trajectory of left liberalism, but they also imply a crisis for the classical liberalism of dignity culture. Has the project of creating a just, multi-ethnic democracy based on individual rights been subverted by a new system of group rights and state-managed social justice? Is the dignity culture's ideal of the resilient, tolerant individual even possible or desirable in the face of acknowledged historical and systemic wrongs? The question of legitimacy. Caldwell argues the Second Constitution lacks democratic legitimacy. Campbell and Manning suggest victimhood culture's conflict style is inherently destabilizing. If these systems are seen as illegitimate by large segments of the population and generate perpetual conflict, what is the end point? Can they be reformed, or does their logic lead to either backlash or collapse? The moral dilemma. This is the hardest question. Both books present a stark warning about the unintended consequences of the civil rights revolution and its ideological successors. But how does a society rectify profound historical injustices, slavery, segregation, systemic discrimination, without creating new bureaucracies, without using group categories, and without incentivizing a culture of grievance? Is the path they describe an unfortunate but necessary phase, or a fatal wrong turn? The personal versus the political. Victimhood culture personalizes the political, seeing a microaggression as an act of systemic oppression. The Age of Entitlement politicizes the personal, turning private relationships and corporate hiring into matters of federal compliance. Have we erased the boundary between the public and the private sphere, and with it, the space for individual error, forgiveness, and growth? These books do not offer cheerful prognoses or 10-point plans for unity. They are, in essence, eulogies for a passing order, the order of dignity culture and the original constitutional framework. They force us to ask, what have we gained and what have we lost in our decades-long quest for a more equitable society? Have we traded the ideal of individual responsibility for a system of group entitlement? Have we traded the difficult work of building a common civic culture for a fragmentary competition of victimhood claims? To engage with Campbell, Manning, and Caldwell is not to agree with every point, but to take seriously the possibility that our well-intentioned journey has led us into a cultural and political labyrinth from which we have not yet found the exit. They provide the map of how we got here. The task of finding a way forward, if one exists, remains ours.